Well, hello there, everyone. It is Monday, March the 7th of the year 2022. Yep, I got the date right. All right. We are here today with another very special guest, and he's turning out to be a weekly guest of mine. I'm sure you all love him. It's Millennial Mike. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Millennial Mike. So take it from here, Mike.
Hey, Mark, thanks for having me on the channel as always. Today, we wanted to talk about something kind of interesting and a little unique to both Mark and I. We're going to compare and contrast the difference between very expensive rental properties in high appreciating markets like where Mark's from down in South Florida or where I'm at in Seattle. And we're going to compare that to cheap rentals or inexpensive rentals like the ones that we both invest in Gary, Indiana. So Mark and I decided we were going to talk about the pros and cons related to expensive rentals first. So Mark, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
All right, sure, Mike. Thank you. What I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about two markets briefly. One is in Virginia where I was living, and another one will be here in South Florida. Okay. So to start off with, when I started investing in real estate, I was in Virginia. I was in the Shenandoah Valley. And it's compared to the country, it's cheaper than a lot of places, but it's higher than, say, in the Midwest. So my first house that I bought was roughly $100,000. The second house I bought was roughly $100,000. All right, so that means I had to put down 20%, which was about a $20,000 down payment. Okay, so after I bought my second one, then I bought a triplex. My cash flow percentage wise was more in the 10 to 12% cash on cash return. So it was okay, but it wasn't great, but it was okay. But one problem I had was I was almost like I exhausted my cash. So to save up another 20 grand, it was going to take me a while. But then I discovered cheaper markets. All right. So before I moved to those cheaper markets, I'm going to lean back up 1 second. With the cheaper markets, I could scale faster because it's a smaller down payment. Okay. But before I talk more on cheaper markets, I want to compare it to South Florida because South Florida is probably comparable to where you are, Mike, in the Northwest. Okay. So here in South Florida, I've had people ask me, it's like, why don't you buy a rental property here? And my reply to them is, well, houses here, what would be a good rental property if I'm lucky, might be 250,000 to 300,000 in that range right there. But rents, if I want to buy and hold long-term tenant, rents might be 1,700, 1,800, 2,000. And me personally, I don't like the idea of having rents below that 1% mark. Okay, and we've talked about the 1%, what that is. And at the same time, to save up a down payment on $250,000 is much harder than to save up a down payment on the house that I'm currently buying. If you saw my video earlier, for $45,500, that's a much smaller down payment. Okay. All right. So I've babbled quite a bit of this, Mike. So go ahead and take it from here to see if you got any follow-up questions or thoughts.
Yeah. So a couple things. You said you bought a house in Virginia for $100,000. How long ago was that?
The first one I bought was in January of 2017.
Okay. So for those folks out there, that house right now would not be worth $117,000 or $100,000 now. It would be worth considerably more. So even though Mark's talking about as he laid it out, a more expensive than Gary, Indiana, it's less expensive than what you're probably looking at today. But he bought that house 5 years ago. Over 5 years ago. So Mark has experience in buying a house in an expensive market, South Florida, and his house appreciated a crazy amount. Mark, I know you've told me that your real estate agent said if they listed your house today, what did you buy it for? What would it be listed for?
Yeah, two things real quick. That house in Virginia, it was 97,000, so almost 100 grand. Zillow now says it's worth like 162, 163. So it's gone up quite a bit. Right. Okay. My house here in South Florida, I paid $555,000 for it, which to me is a lot of money. But my realtor now says at a minimum, he would list at $800,000, if not even higher than $800,000 at this point. And his expectations are, if the market stays like it is here in South Florida, kind of like it is in Seattle, within a couple months, he may list at $1 million versus $800,000 because prices just keep going up.
Right. And there's many different reasons for why prices are increasing. We won't get into that today. We've talked about it in other videos. But one of the major benefits of having a high appreciating market like South Florida, or even like Mark mentioned in Virginia, where the house he bought 5 years ago was 97 and now it's worth 160, 170. That's $80,000 of equity just for holding the property. Or in the case of the one in South Florida, $300,000 of equity. The duplex that I purchased outside of Seattle in 2018, I bought for $450,000. I just had it appraised last month for $669,000. That's a $220,000 appreciation in 4 years. Now, why is this beneficial? With that equity, you can do a whole lot of different things. Mark, do you want to explain?
Sure. Well, one thing I want to say first, since we don't want to get people too excited about this, because you do not buy looking for appreciation, because there's no guarantee prices will keep going up. It's like I tell the missus, even if my house is worth $800,000 now, what if by next year prices drop and it drops down to $600,000? Personally, I don't care. It's no big deal. But if you're buying just for appreciation, and if you have negative cash flow, then you're underwater at that point because prices drop. Okay. And remind me, what was your question again?
The question is when you've managed to find yourself lucky enough to get all of that equity, the new equity, what can you do with it? How can you tap into it?
Sure. I've done a couple things. My property's in Virginia. The main thing I've done is cashback refinances. I took two properties that one was that first house, one was my triplex. I knew they had appreciated. I went ahead and got the appraisals, and I did a cashback. I'm getting ready to sneeze. I'm gonna try to hold off on sneeze. But I got the cashback refinances, and I, in turn, with those cashback refinances, I bought 9 additional single-family homes. Okay, so I did that. I also, one of my second Virginia house, I bought that under market value, did some work to it, and prices were just starting to go up. So I bought that also for $97,000. And when I sold it in 18 months for something like $145, $147. So I got back, I made that little profit, plus I got back my 20% down payment. So I had roughly $65,000. That's $65,000. And I was cash flowing close to $300 on that one house. But that's $65,000. I took that money and bought 5 houses. And those 5 houses all together cash flowed over $1,000, probably $1,200 or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I want people to take away from this is, building on what Mark said, you can't guarantee that appreciation is going to happen, but nothing is guaranteed. The cash flow isn't guaranteed. Appreciation in any market isn't guaranteed. However, when it comes to weighing the difference and the probability of your cash flow being consistent versus appreciation, the market could take a hit. We're looking at things right now with the Fed potentially impacting interest rates, a potential economic world war. There's a lot of different things that could scare people into buying and moving into new homes. And then that affects the housing market, which in turn affects the value of properties. However, everyone still needs a place to live. In the last recession, even as housing prices dropped 50%, rents flatlined. They had been growing at a consistent rate. They flatlined, but they did not drop. After flatlining for a couple of years, they continued to grow after that point. So if you purchase with cash flow in mind instead of appreciation, you're a little bit more guaranteed to weather the storm if there is economic turmoil. Now, Mark said that he did cash out refinances. Me personally, I'm using my equity and a home equity line of credit. I decided that I would rather borrow money to myself. Borrow is a Midwest term. Lend money. I'm not uneducated. I would rather lend money to myself. We just say borrow. I would rather lend money to myself rather than get it from a hard money lender. And then I'll pay back my home equity line of credit. So that's my strategy. So this is really the major benefit of high appreciating markets. It's usually more difficult to get cash flow. As Mark mentioned, the 1% rule, which neither he or I advocate for, is a lot harder to fulfill and satisfy when a home is $400,000 to $600,000. Is it going to rent for $4,000 to $6,000? Probably not. That doesn't mean you can't get a cash flowing rental, but it's not going to be as good as the cheaper rentals that we buy in Gary, Indiana. So Mark, why don't you take this opportunity to explain to us some of the benefits of cheaper and more inexpensive rentals?
Sure. There's one thing, while you were saying that, one thing I was thinking about, as you know, I came to an agreement on buying my 25th house. and that'll make 20 rentals in Northwest Indiana with 2 in Chicago, which is very close. So for easy math, let's just say I have 20 in that area. If those 20 rentals, if rent is rising and rent goes up $50 per house, take that $50 and multiply it by 20. All right, that's a substantial number.
I think it's $1,000 a month, right? 50,
right.
Yeah, that's $1,000 a month.
Right. So that's $1,000 a month. But let's say your duplex, whatever your rent in your duplex is today, can you raise the other side of your duplex? Can you raise that rent $1,000 at next lease renewal?
No, maybe over the next 15 years it'll get there. But
Right. So that's one thing right there. If you're focusing on buying in the Northwest or in the South Florida or in Boston or New York in the expensive markets, you got to be really careful. If you pay too much, you may not positive cash flow. Prices may drop, so you're underwater. And even if you are positive cash flowing just a little bit, if rents only go up $50, it's going to take a while to get you to that $250, $300, $350 a month positive cash flow. One thing real quick I want to caution everyone on, though, is if you start looking around the country, there are lots of cheap markets. Northwest Indiana, Mike and myself, we talk about it. It's not the only cheap market in the country. There's dozens more. But be careful, because I've looked into other markets where I've seen houses that are $50,000, and I'll read the fine print on them, and I'll email or contact the person selling it, and they'll tell me, oh, this meets the 1% rule. It's renting for $500. And $500 rent, $50,000 price, yes, that meets the 1% rule. But if you get too cheap a houses, where meaning the rents are too cheap, when you hold your percentages out for vacancies, repairs, and capital expenditures, the dollar amount is that much lower. So if every year you average some repairs, that may take all of your cash flow because you're holding out that much less dollars per month. Okay.
If you end up having to repair a furnace and you're only bringing in $500 a month for the entire year, well, that's only $6,000 a year. The entire year's worth of rent would go to fix that furnace one time, and you still have to pay your principal and interest, taxes and insurance and everything like that on the mortgage. So in my personal opinion, yes, you can go too cheap. I think that we've kind of found the sweet spot, which is where rents start around $800 and up. And honestly, even that's kind of more where we started. I would say that I don't want to have a property that rents for less than $900 at this point.
Right. I agree with that. And you and I both, in our entire mastermind group, we have found the sweet spot. And before everyone says, hey, we want to jump in on that sweet spot, I've been told this terminology, and I like this terminology. The window of sweet spots, the window of great deals in that market is slowly closing because more and more folks are finding out about it. So yes, you may, just like I did, you may look on the MLS and find a house sub $50,000. But those great deals, I think I said in my video earlier today, they're getting harder and harder to find because prices everywhere are going up. What used to be 40,000, maybe now is 60, 70, 80,000. So they're not as cheap as they used to be. But if you're in California, they're still much cheaper than California prices.
Yeah, like a tenth of the price. So kind of to summarize what we got going on right here, the biggest differences and benefits to the cheap rentals is you're more likely to get good, consistent cash flow. You're more likely to be able to weather a storm. There's going to be cheaper costs to repair things, to handle things like the roof going out, the furnace going out. But you want to be careful of going too inexpensive, because that's going to potentially harbor or inhibit your ability to save enough to actually cover those expenses when they happen. So there is a sweet spot, and that's kind of where we're at with our less expensive market, but not the least expensive market. Mark, I think that's pretty much all the questions that I got for you. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish up?
I think we covered this topic fairly well, Mike, so I do appreciate this. And as always, I appreciate our weekly chat. And next week, I'm sure we'll have another great topic to talk about. And if you want, I'll throw suggestions out, you throw suggestions out, and we'll find a great topic that will benefit everyone to talk about next week. So, Mike, any final thoughts before we close out?
As always, make sure that you're following Mark here on YouTube. He provides really good information. He documents in real time his journey through buying rentals. He's accessible to you. So if you're not following him, you're missing out. We'll catch you guys next week.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Mike. And so for Millennial Mike and mazske Finance, Millennial Mike, we are signing out.